You got this. All right. Good evening, everybody, or good afternoon. This is Tuesday, February 1st, 2022, 4:30 p.m. meeting of the Scarborough, Maine Finance Committee. I call this meeting to order, and quick look to my left and right says all councilors are present. So let the record show that. Do I have a motion for approval of the minutes from the last meeting? So moved.
Second.
Any discussion? Nope. All those in favor? That passes. We have a pretty simple one action item agenda today. This is I think at this point, this is our third meeting about this topic and possibly third and a half. I believe since the election, at least, this has been an ongoing thread at the Finance Committee meeting. So I appreciate everybody following the thread with us. The action item is essentially to further explore and hopefully make a recommendation to the entire council for the downtown TIF. Specifically about the capture rate and to amend the development program. I'm going to let Tom and Shauna, I think, introduce this, but just as a quick timeline matter, I think we ended the last meeting in a pretty good spot. The last meeting was only 2 weeks ago. We did task staff just to do one quick simulation of this year's budget for us so we could get a snapshot of what it looked like to help everybody's understanding. So today's meeting is really just a continuation of that meeting, a little bit sooner than normal, so we didn't have a month in between talking about this topic, which is clearly sometimes it's a dense topic. So we wanted to keep the momentum going, so to speak. So with that, Tom, do you want to start us off? And I'll share the screen if you need it, or you choose.
Yes, let me start off. Thank you, first of all, for agreeing to kind of have an interim meeting here. I think it's helpful for staff, and I think it's going to be helpful to the Finance Committee and hopefully the cause in general, just to have kind of further refined our thinking as this moves forward to council and to the public. So I think the time was well spent, and I don't think we've lost anything in the meantime. So staff was really tasked with two things coming out of the last meeting. One was expanding slightly and refining the actual language in the development program in terms of the allowable uses for TIF funds, and we'll go through that in some detail. And then also doing this financial analysis that really looks specifically at what would the tax shift consequences have been in the current fiscal year as compared to the current status. And we've done that analysis, which I think is helpful in just understanding kind of the flow of money and the benefit of that tax shift. So I know we do have Shauna Mueller here with us, our town attorney. I might suggest we start with the development program because I think we can probably make quicker work of that. So it would be I think it's the first attachment behind the agenda. If you could bring Shauna in and then share a screen, that would be great. So as you're pulling that up, Shauna will speak to some of the further refinements and kind of statutory references and so on and so forth. There were two kind of general additions that we've included here, and we can talk about each individually. One was the addition of reference to transit in the traffic-related improvements, and the other one was affordable housing. That was really missed altogether in the first draft of this, and so we've added a new provision related to affordable housing, which again is allowed under the statute. I should preface this discussion with saying on this sheet, I just want to draw your attention to the highlighted text above. And this is language that exists in the already approved development program. And there's two important points here. One, though items are included in this list, doesn't mean we need to actually spend them on them. It really is seeking authorization from DCD that it complies with the statute and enables us to do it if we choose. And secondarily, we've already agreed and will continue to have future councils approve all expenditure requests via the budget process. So there'll be kind of direct annual line of sight into these discussions. And I think it's an important feature because a lot of folks you set this up and you kind of set it and forget it. No, I expect and intentionally this was designed to have an annual conversation. I think in the earlier years it'll be fairly easy, but as this begins to pick up speed and accumulate funds, I think there'll need to be some detailed kind of accounting around what are we actually funding, because there's a laundry list of legal allowances here, and I think we all need to be crystal clear as to what all we're covering. I guess the final point I'll say is just the way we've designed this is the text in black is the existing language in the already existing approval. The red, or I guess it's the red language text, or items that are either currently in the operating budget or in the CIP. So arguably things we're already spending money on. And the last ones in blue text are new items that, again, are allowed by statute, but aren't necessarily things we're currently making investments on. So with that, Shauna, I'm not sure if you have any further comments regarding this document. I know you did provide some coordination and consolidation of some of these thoughts and some more refined language to comply with the statute.
Yeah, thank you, Tom. I guess I would just say my edits to what the staff provided really were intended to target the statutory language and really think about how DECD will review and consider these when they review them for statutory compliance. And what they're really looking for is to make sure that the town uses language that demonstrates there needs to be a connection to economic development and provides the right parameters around the project. So, for example, you'll see the transit project language in number 1, capital costs. That's just limited to capital costs. If we were a different type of district, which we are not, some operating costs could be eligible. So I needed to make sure we drew bounds around that. So there is an intention behind the revisions that I offered. I'm happy to answer any other questions. I did also want to just point you to both Project 6 and Project 8, which we spoke about last time. Project 6 is the childcare and adult care facilities as an option under the statute. Both the capital costs and operating costs of those types of facilities can be paid for with TIF revenue if the town so chooses in the future. So I wanted to just show you where we put that. In addition, we spoke last time about the leased facility, a potential leased facility that the town would lease from another entity, and that various town functions could exist there. You'll see that at DECD's request, I've included a lot of explicit language, points that the committee spoke about and discussed last time. DECD just wanted us to put it all in there, even though, we all have to acknowledge we don't know if this is going to move forward from the town. But in order for us to be able to move it forward and use TIF revenues potentially for the cost of such a facility, we need to have the language in there. So I'm happy to answer questions about that. And just to say, targeting the language to the statute is important. And also I try to draw this, walk this balancing act to make sure that we keep the options as open and flexible as possible so that, many years from now, we won't have thought of all the potential environmental infrastructure projects we needed to undertake. And so we did some work trying to keep that language broad in addition. And I'm sure Karen can also speak to a lot of the intent behind some of these projects as well. So I'm here for questions.
One final point, important one that I failed to mention at the outset is number 5 here. It's a portion of the public safety building debt. Initially, my initial try at this, I was covering 10%. We've since done some further analysis looking at the statute, and this now includes 50% of that debt. We think there's a number of different, I think, very valid and defensible arguments to comply with the statute as to why that is allowable. So that the language didn't change. We just simply increased the cost estimate to 15 million.
Did you say 15%?
50.
Okay, so with that, let's stay in the application land. So just with what we shared, and we'll take questions for anybody that's in front of us or Shauna. So does anybody have any questions? No, and Tom, I know you just said this, but there was some sort of evolution with the public safety building that we're at least reasonably convinced that we can put more towards that debt service.
Yeah, this is one that probably qualifies under 2 different sections of the statute. And I think we're now comfortable. There's, I think, a very defensible rationale for, frankly, both of them as to why that much of the debt could be covered. I'd be hard pressed to say 100%, But I think 50%, because we did size this building to accommodate additional growth. We do it, it sits within the TIF district. We do anticipate the majority of growth to occur within this, central fire station district. So I think there's any number of very defensible arguments in that regard. And incidentally, as we look forward, and at least in the next couple of years, there's so much debt cost that's likely to be what we use in the first instance, just because it's really easy to maximize whatever TIF revenues exist. But that's a discussion for a different day.
And our current, what was our debt service payment on the public safety building last?
It's about 1.2 million, and it's pretty consistently 1.2, 1.3 for the next 10 or 12 years. I do have the schedule here.
And we can cover half of that 1.2.
Correct.
Okay. And have we bonded all, did we finish bonding all 19? That was done, right?
We did in 3 tranches over 3 years, but yeah, we bonded the full amount at this point.
Ruth, are we all done or?
We haven't bonded anymore. We fully bond the full money.
Yeah, right, okay.
It was close.
Yep, that makes sense. Yep.
We bonded all we needed.
Yep.
And that's an interesting point. We ought to tell the voters that you authorized us to this number, but we didn't go there because we didn't need to spend it.
Sure. Okay, so no questions for us. Before we move on, Ken Johnson or Don Hamill, do you guys have any questions since you're both here and we have 5/7 of the council? You want to, whatever. Get to a mic somehow. I mean, come sit if you want. Might be easier. Yeah.
I did have a question here about the cost of constructing and improving facilities leased by the town within the district. And I know in the heading, it says, we've included these things, but not necessarily, that they're possible, but it doesn't mean that necessarily we're going to do them. Okay, so that makes sense, but this is really quite detailed. So number 8 would, we have a pretty good idea of what we think that would be. So could you spend a little more time just walking through that? And maybe you've done it in a prior meeting, but I just think in terms of, us getting our heads around what's really likely to happen. So that's one question. The other question I had is I didn't see in here where the reference to the debt service for the public safety building is. Is it, did I miss it in here or is it
Yeah, it's
someplace else?
number 5. Yeah.
5. All right, I may be just looking at the.
Yeah, it's the
okay,
$15
great.
million
Okay,
one.
thanks.
Yep.
Great. So that was my big question.
Perfect. Yeah. So I'm going to answer it, then I'll let Shauna really answer it, and then we'll just kind of run the. So Don, I had a lot of those same questions or we all did at the meeting we just had. Because I think I know my concern, which I feel like everybody shared the same concern, is we didn't want there to be some sort of momentum behind. I think it was pretty clear that as a body, we're not interested in leasing a public safety building. I mean, a community center. We kind of went down that path and it wasn't very comfortable for any of us. One of the things that we talked about last meeting, and again, you guys can correct me and then we'll let Shauna correct me. One of the things we talked about was the language of saying a nominal lease. Maybe it's $1, maybe it's $5, because I think one of the things that we're kicking around is you could lease to own it. You could have a nominal lease for it. So that's the question I asked. Shauna said, yeah, that's precisely what we're referencing. But I'll let Shauna speak for herself. But that's just my perspective as the guy that was up here.
Yeah, Don, what I would say is I view this as kind of enabling language, if you will. It preserves an option. And, we're having some conversation around a community center. Arguably, the same approach could apply to other big capital projects like a library or a school, theoretically. So this really just is preserving an option for us, whether we ever choose to exercise that. And there will be very detailed discussions around the legal and financial structure to make sure that it complies with and therefore is eligible for these TIF funds. And we'll rely heavily on legal counsel in that regard. So very important nuances in how we set that up to make sure it qualifies.
So Shauna, can you speak to like the specificity of this? Because this is pretty specific, like Don said. So I think maybe there's a feeling that specificity might mean that there might be more interest than there is or what have you. So if we could just speak to it. So.
Yeah, I'm happy to. The conversations around this have all centered on, we don't know if we really are going to go down this path, but if we chose to, what would we envision a structure or certain terms that might get us comfortable, right? Might get the council and the voters to get behind this kind of a structure and to using TIF revenues to do it. And if that were to occur, these are the kinds of things that DECD, when I spoke to them, wanted me to include. If we were going to enter into a nominal fee or low cost lease or a lease with or a lease to own provision in a lease, the DECD said that, well, I would want you to put that right in your development program amendment so that it is clear in the future that we talked about it. And I approved it as an authorized project cost, understanding that those were potential terms for whatever lease, ended up being selected and approved at the town level. And so that's why those are in there. That's not to mean that they would need to be provisions in a lease. Obviously, that's not to mean that a lease would ever even be entered into and TIF revenues would be used for this purpose. But that's why that specificity is in there, because if we wanted to use those terms in a lease agreement in the future, DECD said to put that right in the document. I think those are the first two bullets there. The second two bullets the third bullet relates to a provision in the statute that is where it says, you can't do general governmental things with TIF revenues. And that provision gave DECD some pause initially. This is the third bullet, actually. Yeah, if the uses of the facility are identified in this unauthorized project costs provision of the statute, such as recreational activities is one of the things that's listed there. I wanted to make sure DECD had in the record that language actually provides an exception for things that are otherwise approved under the statute. And there is a different provision that authorizes this lease agreement. So it was another thing that it was a response to DECD to put that language in there. We can also potentially, this is sort of an aside, but we can move these bullets to a narrative outside of the project cost list itself. I wanted to make sure at least that the Finance Committee had this information and knew that this would be in the amendment one way or another as a response to DECD. And then finally, that last bullet is meant to identify that we don't know what the legal structure would be for an eventual lease agreement. The actual function of paying TIF revenues for the cost of a facility could take the form of a bunch of different things. How is it that the town would be responsible for paying for the facility that it has only a lease arrangement for? And so I talked with DECD about the various different forms that could take. It could involve a credit enhancement agreement. It doesn't have to involve a credit enhancement agreement. And I just wanted to include language to leave open the option for the town to figure out the right structure. And then we can make sure that it fits within the statutory requirements. But that explains why I've got those bullets. It really does, I think, unfortunately, give the impression that we've gotten much farther down the road on a project that isn't really being considered yet. But as Tom said, we need to have it in here in order to preserve the option in the future if the council and the voters decide to kind of go this path.
And just to put a finer point on that, the cost estimate included here is what I've roughly estimated a community center. Now, this is just a seat of the pants number at this point. Again, there may be other concepts that could apply and could be used here. The other point I just raised is that the underlined section here, it says cost of constructing or improving facilities leased by the town. So what's eligible is the cost. It's not, you can't pay the lease payment with these TIF revenues. So theoretically, under a lease relationship, we would we'd bond, we'd build, we'd own, we'd operate, and we'd pay the debt service for that through using TIF revenues. That's as I understand the path forward. But again, no commitments at this point.
Yeah, just so you have Mike, and then John afterwards.
Thanks very much. I also just want to thank the Finance Committee for taking this on and all the work that is being done. I think it's a very worthy and thoughtful process that you're following. And I just want to make sure that we have enough time to socialize this, not only amongst the full council, but also ultimately with the public in some fashion. So when we did this last time, I think the only thing that really came before the council for approval was actually a CEA. So I'm trying to get my head around what shape will this take ultimately in terms of actually moving formal documents through the process for approval, not only by state authorities, but also ultimately for the council. So there's that question. And then there's a question related to that is sort of process and timing. And if I'm premature on that one, I defer to, where the finance committee is on it. But those two things, thanks.
From my understanding, we need a 10-day notice of a public hearing, which has already been brought out in preparation for the February 16th meeting. And so I think there was a tentative workshop for February 16th, and it's on the agenda. I talked to Chairman Clucci about that a little bit today, and we just said, hey, let's see how finance goes today. And that's the extent of the conversation. So what's required? Public hearing, one reading. What are we doing right now, February 16th? And then I think that's up to leadership to circulate with all of us to see how we're all comfortable with. And then I guess the only thing we did this already with the CEA, except this part was the afterthought, right? So it was 2 votes. It was 2 different votes. We did this first because we needed to create this, I believe, to have the CEA. So yeah, so it's almost like we're trying to jump back in time and to say, hey, if we could do that better or, more economically for the town, that's what we're trying to do. But anyways, to answer your question, that's what I have so far. So.
Just to clarify, is the 16th a public hearing and a first reading, or is it just the public hearing?
As of right now, yeah. But again, this is Councilor Chair Clucci. Yes, right. If people want to change that, I think what we're trying to do is, Shauna, help me out here, but I think you said end of March made the most sense, even though that's the
Beginning of March.
Yeah.
Yeah, so DECD does have an annual deadline by March 1st to have all the amendments and approvals of new districts submitted to them. We can get an extension if we want one, but we just have to kind of process that through DECD. And I just say, just to make sure, this is an amendment to the TIF district. So under the TIF statute, the required process is for that public hearing followed by a vote, which can occur the same evening, approving the amendment. And the amendment, as it's contemplated now, would change the percentage capture, and it would change the project cost list, which is simply a list of eligible uses that the council would have to approve annually.
And that project list would look very much like what is in the packet.
So this might be, out of sequence and a little premature, but I would suggest that if it's not, I would suggest for your consideration and discussion, if it's not going to be require a major, act of a body, wouldn't it make sense for us to try to file for the extension so we have the extra time, rather than trying to move it all through by the end of February. February is a short month. We have just, in terms of public engagement, I think folks are, just coming through the holidays, still battling with COVID, still dealing with weather. I think it would make sense for us to build in the extra time, rather than us moving so quickly. Not only, I know we've been through this before, but that's sort of part of the reason for why I'm suggesting that, because we're in the realm of we don't know what we don't know. We really don't know all of the right questions to ask, that could be answered for us in that time frame, number one. And number two, I think it would just be we're talking about some pretty significant changes in terms of how we fund things that have big implications, not only for how we do our budgeting and accounting, but also what impact that would have on us. So I think it'd be very helpful, not just for the public, but also for the council. I'm speaking for myself here, to get completely literate, so that we could help to socialize this effectively and build the right level of support for it. Thanks.
Yeah, I mean, the timeline is self-imposed. This is a unilateral decision. We don't have to do any of this. What I what I believe, and perhaps the next conversation will help demonstrate it, is that there's a compelling financial reason to do this sooner than later. And if we aren't able to do it in, by early mid-March, we'll lose a tax year. And so there's just a financial component to that, but that's a choice we can make if you wish. So I defer to you in terms of timing and process.
What do you mean, Tom? We're gonna lose a tax? Like, at what point do we lose the tax year?
So that is the deadline that DECD imposes, has to do with sort of their promise on when they can turn around an approval. So we will need to, the town will need to make some decisions about whether the general fund is funding the debt service on the public safety building, for example, or the TIF revenue is going to do that. And so you're going to be starting to make those decisions and structure that budget not long from now. And so that's part of why there's this March 1 deadline, which we could get extended through March, so that they get the submissions in time for them to turn around approvals before your fiscal year begins.
So Sean, it has no bearing on the assessing year of April 1st. That's just happens to be same time of year. It's more.
Yeah, I mean,
it's more
for this case.
More the practical considerations of, we're in the midst of budget and need to figure out how we're going to fund different things.
It is really about that. I mean, the deadline itself relates to when a new district, really it's for when a new district is being designated. And then your starting value is based off of that. And so that's why the April 1 deadline and March 1 deadlines are in the statute. But it just ends up when you're amending districts, that has a big impact on your next fiscal year. So that's the timing. I did want to, but I know we're on the topic of process and I don't want to lose sight of that, but I did want to get back to Councilor Hamels before I forget. Other comment about where the debt service shows up. And I just wanted to acknowledge that you'll see the project cost list doesn't make reference to debt service. It makes reference to the underlying project itself. In another part of the existing development program, there is a statement that says any of the projects we've identified in the project list can be paid for with bonded indebtedness should the town so choose, and TIF revenues are eligible to pay that debt service. Just to close the loop on that. And then we can get back to process questions.
Okay, so I'm going to move on from the process question, but if I'm hearing Councilor Hamel correctly, he'd probably prefer to do one extra step than probably what it seems like there is. It seems like people would probably be open to it, but there's that competing force of possibly an extension. Looking at the calendar, I believe we're meeting on March 2nd, Wednesday, March 2nd. So maybe a compromise is we get a 4-day extension and do a public hearing on the 16th of February and then a first reading on March 2nd. Shauna, would you think that would all make everything doable?
Yes.
Okay, so sounds to me like we might have an easy solution for everybody there. So I'll just say that out loud and we'll kind of cross that bridge when Chairman Cucci hears all this. But
yeah,
if the lawyer says that we won't miss the tax year, Shauna, is that because commitment's in April, right, Nick? Yeah.
The assessment date.
Yeah.
Commitments in August.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah. Sorry, Shauna, go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah, I think you'd said March 2nd.
Yeah, I think we'd have a
Yeah.
normal, regularly scheduled council meeting on March 2nd. Yeah.
Yeah, it would be great if that gets decided relatively soon, then we can process that request for the extension and just not have to worry about that. But yes, I don't see a problem with that. I think that will give everybody some frame of reference in terms of getting accustomed in the budget process to what sorts of revenue can pay for what. And then of course it'll be approved by DECD well in advance of when Nick has to commit.
You still have a question, but let me just wrap up this. Was your question about the process or is it something separate?
It was separate.
Okay, good. So let's wrap up the process. I'm going to ask for, to make this simple, Shauna, and I'm going to ask for a motion from one of my counselors to see if we can make an official recommendation of the timeline.
So I move that the timeline include a first reading at our scheduled meeting on Wednesday, February 16th, with.
Public
a
hearing on February.
Public hearing, and first reading, and then a second reading on, sorry, I have the date wrong. Wednesday, February 16th. And then Wednesday with a second reading on March 2nd.
And there's only one reading required, so can we revise that motion to just say public hearing on the 16th
And action on the second.
and
Sorry.
action on the 2nd?
Yep.
Let's try that again.
Yeah, that's okay.
I move that the
Strike it all.
recommendation of the Finance Committee be first reading on Wednesday, March 16th with a vote on Wednesday, March 2nd. Public hearing. Guys,
Yeah.
we don't do public hearings on the other side. I don't know these
You can
things.
Give it a shot.
We
I can
have
Give it a shot.
You got this,
No,
Sean. Do it.
absolutely not.
Oh, okay, good. I like it.
Absolutely not.
I like it. One more time.
Third time's
One
the
more
charm.
time.
Third time's the charm.
I move to recommend that the Finance Committee set a schedule of a public hearing on Wednesday, February 16th with a first reading and vote on Wednesday, March 2nd.
Second.
Any discussion on that?
Ha,
So that's an official recommendation from the Finance Committee. Do I have a vote? All in favor? Okay, so we have officially recommended a timeline that is, I believe, slightly longer than what was in the books to meet in a happy middle ground. Councilor Anderson, did you have something to talk about
Yeah.
or ask?
Quick question, because Tom, you kind of referenced the budget processes, like these are qualified projects that we would need to evaluate during budget process to actually assign the TIF revenues
Mhm.
as they fill up our fund. What is the requirement, since these are TIF revenues, especially for big capital projects where it would be over 400,000, would those still have to go to voters as part of the budget process? So these would still be treated similar to bonds?
Yes, they would. The charter requirement extends beyond just indebtedness. It's any appropriation above 400,000. So regardless of funding source, TIF revenues would still, there are exclusions, but still generally require voter approval.
Okay. That's just good for
Yep.
clarity.
And Shauna, just, this is a rabbit hole we don't need to go super deep down, but just back to the lease situation with the community center. We still haven't fully explored, even if we were to bond the structure, but lease the land, let's say, we still haven't even explored if we can get tax exempt bonds for that, or I know we talked about it last meeting. It's still a little bit of a question mark, correct?
Correct. Yeah,
Okay.
we haven't really delved into that, but certainly can whenever the timing is right.
Right, and we don't, and I don't want to, I think I actually asked the question specifically to illustrate that that's how far we off for even having that conversation, right? So as a finance committee, we're not even diving into funding, real funding sources for this idea, right? So I'm actually asking it more to illustrate how far, we're not even at the starting line there for that project, so to speak. Okay, I'm gonna move on because I feel like everybody thinks the application looks good. Next thing, order of business, I think is, Tom, can you walk us through the mock budget? Is that,
Sure.
I think that makes the most sense now.
Yeah, Nick Cludier, our assessor, and Karen Martin, our economic development director, really collaborated on this document. I think it makes sense to kind of turn it over to them and kind of take the time to just walk through it. Essentially, what you have is two columns here. One is, the right-hand one is the current capture, kind of the current status. And the other one is models the 100% capture. And if you work all the way down through this, and we will, it actually boils it down to what effect it would have on the average taxpayer, average being a 400,000 valued home. And I think that's, in my mind, and I think for many, it's the simplest way to kind of boil it down to really demonstrate the value of the tax shift. So with that, Nick and Karen, I'll turn it over to you.
I'm happy to start. So as Tom was saying, this is to outline the benefits of potentially capturing more value, specifically 100% capture rate of new value. In the two columns, you can see what we are and what we could be at 100%. And as you've heard the terms thrown around, the tax shift benefit, and there's three sources of that, being the county tax, and then being revenue sharing from the state, and then state aid to education, while not a minimum receiver. So those percentages are the potential dollars. If we talked about 57 or 58 cents on the dollar when we had our initial TIF discussions, those are the monies that if we do not capture new value in a TIF district, we effectively lose out on, either by having to pay more county taxes or not getting money from the state that we could have. So this outlines that process of what, if we capture 100% in this district, the monies that could be gained as a process or not lost. And we used actual fiscal year 22 data, so the most recent year we're in right now, under both scenarios. And we start at the top just to kind of outline the A, B, and C are the different groupings of funds that can be captured or not. So there's the downs portion. It's 40% of just the area in the CEA. So it's not all the parcels in the district as a whole. And then the next part is the town capture percentage that was done this current year, 3%. And then the remaining is what wasn't captured this year, but could be in this process of increasing the rate. And then the next part down there, it's to illustrate the point. If you go up a little bit, Paul, the part in gray, that's just to illustrate that in both of these scenarios, before we start talking about what the tax shift benefit is, there's effectively a net zero change to the budget, no matter how much you capture. And that's important to kind of visualize the tax rate comp sheet, if you will, when we get to commitment time and budget time, because although you're offsetting expenses that you won't have to take from the general fund by using TIF revenues, you're funding the TIF account that pays for it. The TIF account is an expense at budget time. So it's a net zero. You're funding from a different source. So it's the same starting point for both calculations. So if we start with the tax shift, if you scroll down, as I discussed, the county tax, and that's 3.9% approximately. These are estimates based on known data from recent years. It calculates how much of each of those ABC pockets of potential revenues could be sheltered, if you will. And then the county, the amount that's sheltered in each scenario is expenses that you wouldn't have to pay in county taxes as a result of your state valuation being lower. And then going down to revenue sharing.
Nick, sorry to,
Yeah.
just because two other counselors asked me, and I just to reiterate the answer, the 40% of the down CA right now is sheltered. So if you look at our current capture, it's 15,893. And even if we do 100% capture, it's still 15,893,
Correct.
because that 40% of the downs, we take it, we immediately give it back to them. So it is sheltered. It's almost like a
Correct.
standard deduction on our personal taxes.
Yep. And the term sheltered means sheltered from the state equalized valuation.
Yes, correct. Yep. I just wanted to say it out loud because two people have asked me and it's worth repeating. Okay, I'm sorry. Back to revenue sharing.
Yep. And then revenue sharing, 4.8%. And so that illustrates the pockets for A, B, and C, different sources of capture availability. And then those funds no longer need to be raised and they reduce the general fund levy because they're being paid from a different source. And then the state aid to education, that's the bigger one when not in minimum receiver status, that generates more benefits because your state valuation's lower. You presumably get more state aid for education. And the totals of those three sources total to 57.6% of every dollar of revenue that's sheltered. And those are the totals you'll see in the current capture. Although the assumption at the very top explains there has been no tax shift benefit yet, because you don't receive the benefits for 3 years as outlined on the next page. We will receive, had this been the third year, we would have received $216,000 of benefit. Conversely, in the 100% capture scenario, we would have had a different number, a higher shift benefit of 660,000 versus 254. So there's approximately a $400,000 net gain to the town in reduced expenses and more money from the state in this scenario.
Just if I could, it's worth bearing just a further conversation on that one, the tax shift piece. The county tax is actually less money we would pay to the county.
Right.
Whereas the other two, revenue sharing and state aid, it's more we get in subsidy, so it's revenue. So they both work the same way. One's in reduced expense, the other ones are increased revenues, so it's net benefit to the bottom line for us.
And then if you go down to the bottom portion, it kind of spells out what does that mean for the tax levy and the average taxpayer, if you will. So giving those two numbers, we compare it to the amount of money that would have had to be raised for taxes had we in actual fiscal year 22. But after the shift benefit, the 100% capture is reduced by the 660,000. So only 72,087 would have had to been raised. And the other side, it's a little bit less because less shift benefit. And then it goes on, when you divide the amount needed to be raised into the taxable value, you get the new corresponding tax rates had these capture scenarios occurred in shift benefits. And you see the benefits to $400,000 property.
And we were, that 14.96, that's our actual mill rate right now? Or is that?
Nope, the 1502 is actually.
That's right. And so just to reiterate, even these current captures, assuming we're capturing, but we're not yet because we need to wait the 3-year lag time.
So we are capturing, but we haven't received the shift benefit. If this had been the 4th year, let's say, of these numbers, we would have had a lower tax rate.
Yes, but that's why 14.96 doesn't match up perfectly with our 15.02.
Yep.
Is because this is assuming current year, but future capture.
Mhm.
Yeah, I just wanted to say it.
And just a reminder, we may start 3 years later, but we also, once the TIF is done, it stays in the state valuation, so we get the benefit for 3 years past the end of the TIF.
And then the, not to jump ahead, because I'm sure there may be questions here, but the next sheet kind of explains in a little more narrative form the whole reasoning why we don't get the benefit right away, because there's a lag time of the state equalized valuation, which enters into all the calculations about the tax shift.
Karen, do you guys want to add to that or?
No, I think, yeah, Nick and I worked on this. We actually came at it from 2 different ways and
Came
came
to
up
the
with
same
the same
number?
numbers.
That's good.
So we were pretty happy.
We might have buried the lead here. I mean, just to see, what this shows is that under the 100% capture, the taxpayer at a $400,000 property, their bill will be $56 less. So there's a demonstrated benefit. And of course, this is 1 year of 27. So presumably the district will continue to grow, and these certainly tax shift benefits will continue to accrue year over year over year. This is very simplistic, one little snapshot, but I think is illustrative just to show the benefits based on actual numbers.
And you see the differences between 660,000 versus 254, roughly 400,000. Well, that ratio, the more value there is, continues to trend, and there's more and more benefit over time to the higher capture rate when there's new value.
Okay, thank you. Perfect. With that, any questions from the committee for Nick or Karen?
No questions. I would say this exercise was really helpful because I know that one of the things that we were worried about was talking in hypotheticals and unintended consequences. And, we figured that there would be a tax shift benefit. And so it's helpful to just see in real numbers. And, I don't know that it's bearing the lead that $56 might seem nominal, but we've certainly argued over less.
It's something. Yeah, the other thing that's come up in these conversations is that, and why this conversation I think is front and center right now, is that we are out of minimal receiver status.
Yes.
So all of a sudden the tax shift benefit goes from 8% to 58%. Should we ever go back to that status, and that may happen, future council could choose to do other things and react to that. But I would submit that even an 8% benefit is something that we should be trying to maximize. So that's, if I was offered an 8% return on investment, I think I'd take it. We can model that too. The differences are, not quite as dramatic, if you will, but they're notable.
I just agree with everything Tom said. Can I ask some random questions now?
Random's good. Oh, wait, hold on. Let's get off the finances first. Ken or Don, do you guys have any questions on that since? Ken, just raise your hand if you have any questions, assuming you're, Don, you all set or?
I did have one.
Yeah, go ahead. Yep.
Two questions. One, you talked about the general fund there. Is that, so can you explain the difference between the general fund balance and the unassigned fund balance? Is this,
That really has no bearing in this analysis.
but from a prior slide, can you explain that? I saw that on one of the sheets where you're talking about the impact of the fund balance,
I
effect of
think
the fund
this
balance.
is what you're looking at.
general
New
fund
gen-
balance.
I
Is
think
that,
that's essentially that's where we are. That's actually our budget, so to speak. That's-
Yeah, whether or not it's correctly named there, it's the amount to be raised for the budget.
That's our
Okay.
budget. Yeah.
so the unassigned fund balance would be a subset of the general fund balance?
Now, the unassigned fund balance would be the money we have sitting in the bank that we either over collected or our revenue or reduced expenses
Yeah,
each year.
this is a
So-
poor choice of titling.
Yeah.
That is not to be construed. That is the amount that we need to raise currently through taxation to support town and school.
You can think of
affairs.
that as our net budget, what we're raising for taxation.
Correct.
But this is mainly a school, what we would need to raise for school funding,
Everything.
everything.
Yep.
Okay.
That's
The reason
what
I'm
we got.
asking is I'm trying to make the connection between, the requirement to maintain a certain fund balance.
Yeah, it really has nothing to do with this. I don't see that there would be direct correlation to the fund balance per se. It simply is reducing the amount that we need to raise through general taxation.
Okay,
I mean, if you wanted to go that line of sight, so to speak, that gives us more breathing room to add to the reserve account that we've been creating for our capital improvement projects,
Right.
right? So that $4,000 savings, we could take that 4,000 and actually go assign it to our capital improvement and say, hey, it's a net zero, so to speak, but we've actually saved $400,000 physically in an assigned fund. We could do that, lets us do that. We're gonna add or subtract to our general fund balance if we bring in more money than we expected, or we spend less money than we expected. Then it gets dumped into our bank account, our checking account, our unassigned fund balance. But we didn't really ask to do that here. This is just, hey, if this was budget season,
Right.
this is what he'd present. Yeah.
so and maybe, I'm not a cycle here, but I'm trying to think forward to, over time when we're trying to track the impact of this, rather than having it be event-based, is there some way we would look at this periodically like we, would with other financials to see how are we trending and that sort of thing? Is that a TIF sort of, accounting and reporting exercise, or is that something that we need to do differently based upon this, how big this is becoming as part of our financials? Is there any special requirement, or is there a special opportunity for us to try to get this on the radar screen so people can see how it's tracking? I mean, I understand the point of this ad hoc analysis, and it's all good news, but is there a way for us to, should that be on our windscreen?
Right. And I think one of the things Ken and I talked about today is, the budget should now have, just like the budget, we have things that are in the CIP, we have things that are bonded and appropriated. There needs to be a coding system that says this is paid for by TIF revenues.
Right.
Right now, we don't have a whole lot of that action because we don't pay for a lot of stuff out of TIF revenues, right? But I think this would add a new dynamic to the budget book that would call out, to your point. Yeah, in my opinion, as the guy that's sitting at Chair of Finances, yeah, our budget should now spell out more explicitly what's coming into the TIF revenue account and what are we spending it on.
So this is a great point, because I think that the extent we can help the council and the public make the connection between, this is a pretty big adventure we're heading forward with potentially, as a town, and it's going to have a big impact on our financials and decisions we make about how we operate and how we fund things. Is there a way for us to help give people an idea of how will you be seeing this in the future, other than when it's time to get it in front of the state for the approval in the first place?
Yeah, just to build on that, because this was something I was just kind of thinking about, kind of aligned with Councilor Hamill's questioning, but again, I don't think it's like a this year or next year
Yeah.
probably challenge, but it's probably like at what point when the value is so high, do we proactively, or do we indicate to the council, maybe through a policy, to proactively evaluate the capture, right? So like, if we're starting to bring in $2 million in the TIF fund each year, I don't know what the right number is, but like,
Mhm.
And we can't spend it.
yeah, does that become a trigger to say like,
Yeah.
hey,
Yeah.
you guys need to evaluate this, you need to readjust because that's too much to be taking in at a single time. So I just don't know like when that's actually gonna happen, because it's dependent on the value, right?
And the projects. that we
Yeah,
have, right?
and the
So
projects.
If there's
So,
no projects, then.
yeah,
I think the first exercise we undertook, really identifying things we're already spending money on in the operating budget and things that we think will qualify through the capital program, was quite telling that there's a lot of need that we're already covering. So the simplistic way I look at this is that every tax dollar that comes from new value that we don't shelter is worth $1. Every dollar that we shelter is worth $1.58. And so that we're really looking at the tax shift benefit. And I just think it's an overwhelmingly compelling argument. And frankly, we've never maximized the value that's allowed to the statute.
so one question I had was, so what happened? Yeah, so what happened, oh no, maybe it is.
It
is.
wasn't.
This mask is a good mask. So what happens if, like, say there's a project that comes to the downtown district that would want a CEA, how would that impact this? Because if we're already sheltering 100%, does that mean we can't support a CEA, or would we have to change something with the ECD? Like, what would be the trigger if we wanted to?
Yeah, we can't commit money through a CEA if it's already committed somewhere else.
Yeah.
And so I think conveniently that may be a very convenient answer to anyone that comes looking for a CEA in the future. Shauna, did I say that right?
Well, I mean, I think it really depends upon if the council has really already dedicated the TIF revenues that it's anticipating generating for approved project costs. If you haven't, if you have room, if there's more value than you're able to fully spend, then, being what's called an omnibus district already, the council does have authority to entertain potential credit enhancement agreement applicants. That has to go through the same full public process locally that we've been through before with credit enhancement agreements. But because you've already got that up to 100% capture, it's really just a measure what you project the revenue to be, and on a particular parcel within a district, presumably that's the nature of a credit enhancement agreement that would kind of come forward. It would just be about that particular parcel. You think about how much revenue the town would be foregoing out of its own municipal TIF fund and decide whether that's worth it based on what the applicant is bringing to the table.
So this
So
conversation.
it's possible.
Yeah, this
Yeah.
conversation is all about what to do with the other 61.5% of new value created in the TIF district. We've identified internally how we could spend it. That doesn't necessarily mean you can't also agree in the future to give some of that to someone else, but you'll have to make choices. That means you can't fund everything else you wanted to.
Mhm.
So, but I think out of the gate, it's a fairly simple response to an inquiry that we're already 100%. Whether that's enough to sustain and keep someone away from pursuing a CEA in the future remains to be seen, but
Well, I'm just curious, like, more from Karen, the business community, like, does this create a disincentive for them to want to do business in Scarborough if the perception is the TIF is already 100% captured? I just want to make sure that.
Well, I want to come back to what Shauna said,
Okay.
and Shauna, you correct me if I'm wrong. Doing a credit enhancement agreement is an authorized use of TIF funds, and we already spell that out because we have a credit enhancement with obviously the Downs.
and you don't need DCD approval. It's
Right.
within your control.
Exactly. It's
Okay.
totally within your control. And at some
Okay.
point, you're 5 years down the line, you've got a lot of money coming in. You certainly could decide to do a credit enhancement agreement for someone. You can time it. It's your choice.
Okay.
And I don't think we don't have to do an amendment. Is that correct, Shauna?
Correct.
If helpful, I'd like to provide an example. We already have two others in this district, the Jocelyn Place that hasn't been finalized yet, but has been approved. And then there's another one across the street at the old public safety building. So how it works when you capture 100% is those are at 75% CEAs. When you capture 100%, the town gets 25% of that particular parcel's remaining funds. So it doesn't preclude future CEAs. It just says if we agree to 50%, the town only gets 50% of that property now. And we get the difference of whatever the CEA doesn't say. So we can have future CEAs ongoing to the council's liking, and the town would just get the difference between what they get and 100%.
And just to add to that, we did this exercise, I think, several months ago, but what this effectively does, it actually makes the CEAs have, quote, they're less impact, so to speak, when you are getting the tax shift benefit from the, let's say, 25% that you're holding onto, or the 60% that you're holding onto. It actually makes the CEA have less of a financial impact than if it was outside of this district, so to speak. So
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's an interesting distinction because our conversation is around what's occurring in these 1,000 acres, whereas the CEA is around a particular parcel and value created on that parcel. So it's easy to kind of conflate the two. So it doesn't preclude it, but I think it makes it, yeah, it doesn't preclude it.
Good. Thank you. That was really helpful. That was my random question.
that was it.
Yeah.
I was gonna say we're on to the random question phase. If there's any other random question phases.
Not a question as much as a comment, because I'm supportive of this moving forward, and I don't know if we're going to actually motion for what
Yeah,
the recommendation is.
I would
but,
expect to. Yeah.
I just go back to what Councilor Hamel said before about more about communicating and how do we communicate this to the public. And so I'm just wondering if maybe at the communications committee meeting, which is next week, if we could have the experts come share the expert view, like a lot of this stuff, with Allison and others to just really try and figure out how do we create a communications approach around this in a way that's, simple, easy to digest, that as we go through the process of the public hearing and the first reading, we're thinking about how do we get this information out to the public in an easy way to absorb. That's kind of, as I'm thinking about this and trying to figure out how to explain it to the public, what are some simple analogies or things we can do? How do we make all of the great work that's been done to get to this point easily available online? Because there's a lot of good presentations and things, like myself personally, having to go through many of the packets to try and pull it all together myself. I think if we can make it more readily available, that shows the history of how we got to this point. And just think of the communications around it. I think that's
Liam, I'll let him speak to it, but he's been working with Allison. We've got Karen and to a certain extent in the conversation. And I believe Karen's actually going to do a leader article that will direct some attention back to some resources we're creating right now.
Yeah.
So Liam, you want to flesh that out?
Yeah, I mean, to almost agree. It sounds like it's a planted question. I mean,
Maybe it
this
is.
really helps me out, Councilor Anderson, so I appreciate that with Tom. We're working currently on a web page that really is sort of the basics of TIFs. What is a TIF? What's the history of TIFs in Scarborough? What are the impacts? And I think the objective here is to bring the general public up to where we're at right now, which is what is the value of this type of tax shift capture. And so those are well underway with Allison. I expect we will be prepared to speak to that at the next communications meeting. And I was actually hoping to reach out to you before that to have a conversation. As Tom referenced, Karen's gonna be working on a leader article, which kind of does the same thing. So we're well underway with a communications plan with bringing the public up. It's not to get into the discussion about how to allocate or use TIF revenues. That's sort of chapter 2, if you will. Simply, what is a TIF? What's about benefit of a tax shift? And what are some of the thoughts around that?
Yeah.
Good thought. And I think we're on the same page, which
Okay,
is
It strikes me, yeah, as part of that communication plan, I think a piece from a member of council might be really helpful. It's easy to get caught up in the weeds. And so I think we've been very thoughtful and careful about how we message this. But I think conveying to the public that you just took action on the Highgate Parkway TIF and you're contemplating actions here, the big takeaway is that you're looking to maximize tax shift benefits to to the benefit of our taxpayers. I mean, I don't know that the initial message needs to be any more complicated than that.
Yeah.
And I'm pleased to work with you and whomever else to kind of craft that message. But that might be a good piece to follow up, behind these resources being available, and Karen's piece as well.
Yeah, I think it would be good to, and again, we can cover this more in the communications committee, not to take up too much time. here.
Hijacking my meeting over here. No, I'm just kidding.
But I think.
Hijack it all you want. I don't care.
I think like, you did, I personally think your article that you recently did was really catchy, and I think you're good at writing those types of things. So I would.
The
look
blog?
towards the finance chair,
Blog,
maybe to
yeah.
help
Totally.
keep it simple. So, and again, we have more flexibility now with the leader that we can submit articles more than once a month. So if we wanted to try and do something just to tie in between the
Mhm.
public hearing and the first read, just to again, get the information out so that it's timely, I think that would be great.
Yeah, and I'll, if you nudge me, I'll totally whip something up and we
I'll
can
nudge you.
collaborate. Not to further hijack this meeting, but there are a lot of concurrent things going on during this downtown process, and it would be nice if we could work as a collective. One of the things Don and I used to talk a lot about leadership is Don would say that we don't have a lot of sizzle in downtown yet. Westbrook has their Chick-fil-A and their concert venue that comes and goes. I don't quite know, but yeah, but we're kind of starting to circle around a little bit of sizzle. We have some pretty severe, pretty heavy duty traffic improvements coming that aren't going to increase our mill rate. We have this strategy that's a little more dense to understand. So I'm not going to claim this is an easy job. We have some actual with IDEX and Costco, we have some recognizable businesses coming into the downtown area. We're ramping up we're getting a more defined vision of the downtown. Really, we're working in silos because you have to. That's how you get stuff done. Otherwise, we'd never get stuff done if 7 or 12 of us did this all together. But I think we should, Liam, Allison, John, me, we should really, we got to start talking about all this all together as well, because this is a package deal that is very purposely being done in a sequence of events. I mean, I know my objective to bringing this at the forefront of finance was to coincide exactly with everything that's happening here. And the minimum receivership clearly was a kick in the pants to get it done. But just as a council, I think we need to articulate how these parts are very much in sync with each other, intertwined, and they work together. They're actually not working against each other. They're all working in harmony with each other. So it's a challenge.
I think that's the challenge, is painting the big picture.
Yes.
And then
Yeah.
being able to go deep, because the TIF
Yes.
is
Yeah.
one part of it
Right.
that, we need to allow the public to kind of create their own journey. Where do they want to go? How
Right.
deep do they want to
Sure.
go? But how can we pull it all together and then create the deepness?
To Councilor Johnson's point, I think, you're talking to the Crossroads team about a potential community center. It remains to be seen whether there's able to come together on that, but that's an intersecting point
Right.
for these two conversations, right?
Right.
And part of what we did tonight is kind of just provide the option for that to be on the table as part of the financing, if you choose to put it together. So this is all building up to something in the future, but you're right. We ought to take the time to celebrate the successes and start connecting the dots, how they all relate.
Because we've been doing a good job about all the big dots individually, but they're all happening at the same time. So,
Mhm. Agree.
okay, any more
I would-
finance discussion?
I would, if you don't mind, I just wanted to, this doesn't necessarily help with the communication to the public, but I just want to make sure you all are prepared to see the application that will come before you in the form of a TIF amendment documentation.
Yeah.
That's what's going to be on the record for the public and on your desks for potential approval. And it has to follow the statutory requirements, so it's not necessarily as user friendly and achieving the goals that you're just talking about here with communicating to the public. But what you'll see is a narrative that's going to be rather short. I think it's a couple of pages long. And then it just describes, where did this district come from? What's the history of it? What are the amendments that are taking place here? So it's just going to say it's an increase in the capture rate. And here is an improved, amended and restated project cost list. And that will be one of the exhibits with this list that you've been looking at. And then we'll also include a required revision of the projection of TIF revenues for the district over the whole term of the years. So you'll see that it's a lot of guesswork as you can imagine. But that's a required component, so you will see that, as well as a projection of the total tax shift benefit for the duration of the TIF district term. One of the exhibits I'm intending to include is also going to be the existing development program, so the original documentation. So it's going to be a hefty amount of paperwork for you all, but you can read the first 2 pages and understand, what's going on there. And that's what goes up to DECD for review and approval. So I just wanted to make sure you knew what that's going to look like generally.
So I think I can make the motion, right? That's not out of the rules, even though I'm the chair, right? Make a motion to ask Shauna to prepare a application amendment in the spirit of what we have in front of us in the multicolored, and to make a recommendation to the full council to increase our capture rate to 100%. Shauna, does that suffice for a motion?
That's great.
Okay.
So moved?
Any discussion?
Do I need a second? or-
Well, he motioned, so I seconded technically.
Now I got a what? I know. All those in favor? All right, great. With that, is there any public comment? I think is there anybody in here? Anybody like to speak? No, with that, motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second?
All those in favor? Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.